On the 25th of October, 1415, under a leaden-gray sky, a sick and starving English army prepared to die. Trapped in a muddy field in northern France, the men of King Henry V faced their end. Before them, blocking their only escape route to the safe harbor of Calais, stood the flower of French nobility. A sea of polished steel and silken banners, a force 5 times their number, brimming with an almost divine arrogance. A French victory was so certain that the nobles were already arguing over how to divide the ransom for the English king and his lords. Fate seemed to have dictated an unappealable death sentence for the small, desperate invading force, an ignominious end on foreign soil. Yet, for the young King Henry V, that rain-soaked battlefield was not a tomb, but a forge. It was the anvil upon which, with a will of iron, he would craft an immortal legend from yew wood, English steel, and the blood of his enemies. While the French aristocracy saw a simple extermination, Henry saw an opportunity, a tactical equation where the terrain, the weather, and the desperation of his men could nullify the enemy's overwhelming numerical advantage. He knew his men were at their limit, but he also knew that desperation can be the catalyst for the most extraordinary courage. He was preparing not for a heroic defense, but to orchestrate one of the most one-sided massacres in military history. The English victory at Agincourt was not merely the triumph of the longbow over the armored knight. It was a masterpiece of terrain warfare, a symphony of death conducted by a king who understood the geography of the battlefield better than his enemies. Henry V did not overcome the French. He tricked them into defeating themselves. By choosing a muddy bottleneck between 2 forests, he neutralized their power and channeled their arrogance into a slaughterhouse. The rain of arrows was the murder weapon, the visible cause of thousands of deaths. But the true killer, the silent general of that day, was the mud, which transformed the most powerful and proud knights in Europe into heavy, exhausted targets, ready for the sacrifice. At the head of the English army stands King Henry V, a figure who embodies the duality of leadership. He is young, charismatic, and capable of inspiring men on the brink of starvation with speeches that would resonate through the centuries. But beneath that facade lies a pragmatic, calculating, and utterly ruthless mind. Faced with a desperate situation, he shows no fear or doubt, instead projecting an unshakable confidence, turning his army's hopelessness into a weapon. He is the embodiment of his nation's will, a warrior king who not only leads from the rear, but fights on the front line, sharing the same bloody ground as his men. His determination is the center of gravity for the entire English army. His force is a ghost of its former self. Of the men who landed in France, only 6,000 to 8,000 remain, the majority of whom, some 5,000 to 6,000, are archers. The rest are men-at-arms, knights, and lords who will fight on foot. They are gaunt, malnourished, and weakened by an outbreak of dysentery that has ravaged their ranks. Their motivation, however, is the most powerful of all: survival. They have marched hundreds of miles in a hellish retreat, harried by the enemy and hunger. Now, with the road home blocked, they fight not for glory or conquest, but for the right to see another dawn. Every man knows that surrender is not an option. The only way out is to fight. Facing them, the French giant is a spectacle of feudal power. An army of 20,000 to 30,000 men whose main strength lies in thousands of knights and men-at-arms, encased from head to toe in the finest plate armor money could buy. They are the elite of French society, a warrior caste bred for battle, who see combat as their birthright and their greatest source of honor. Their equipment is second to none, their morale is sky-high, and their confidence is absolute. They believe victory is not just inevitable, but will be easy. A simple matter of rolling over the pathetic little band of English peasants who dare to stand in their way. But this colossal force suffers from a fatal weakness, an arrogance that breeds indiscipline. The command is divided among several high-ranking nobles, such as Constable Charles d'Albret and Marshal Boucicaut. But in practice, every duke and count considers himself a general. They are so eager to claim the glory and honor of victory that they argue over positions in the vanguard, ignoring any coherent tactical plan. Their contempt for the English archers, whom they consider mere peasants unworthy of facing a nobleman in combat, blinds them to the real danger. Their plan is a simple, brutal cavalry charge, a tactic that has worked for centuries, not realizing they are about to charge into a new era of warfare. The battlefield is a freshly plowed field stretching between the dense woods of Agincourt and Tramecourt. At first glance, it seems no more than a piece of farmland, but in the hands of Henry V, it becomes the most important weapon in his arsenal. The two masses of trees on either side create a natural funnel, a bottleneck that prevents the vast French army from using its overwhelming numerical superiority to outflank the small English force. This forces the French to attack head-on, on a narrow front where only a fraction of their army can fight at once. The terrain itself becomes Henry's silent general, channeling the enemy's strength and turning it into a weakness. But the decisive factor was the weather. The torrential rains of the previous night have transformed the plowed field into a bog, a deep, sticky quagmire that clings to everything. It is a death trap for any man trying to cross it wearing 20 to 30 kilos of steel armor. Aware of this, Henry makes his masterstroke of preparation. He orders each of his thousands of archers to prepare a wooden stake nearly 2 meters long, sharpened at both ends. To witness how these simple stakes become the teeth of an anti-cavalry trap and how the mud becomes England's deadliest ally, subscribe to our channel and activate notifications, because the arrow storm that is about to begin will drown the chivalry of France in a sea of blood and mud. For several hours, the two armies remain motionless, watching each other across no man's land. The French, confident of their victory, expect the desperate English to attack first, but Henry is too cunning to fall into that trap. Seeing the impatience and growing disorganization in the enemy ranks, he makes a bold and risky decision. He orders his entire army to advance. In a tense silence, the English uproot their defenses and march forward until they are just within range of their longbows, about 250 meters from the French line. It is a deliberate provocation, a direct challenge to the flower of French chivalry. The move is a masterstroke of psychological warfare. The English halt, drive their sharpened stakes into the ground before them, creating a makeshift forest of spears, and then, at Henry's command, 5,000 archers draw their bows in unison. The first volley of arrows rises into the sky, a dark swarm that falls upon the French vanguard with a deadly hiss. This act of audacity is the spark that lights the pyre. The French nobility, outraged by the insolence of these peasants and consumed by impatience, can no longer hold back. Without a centralized command, the first wave of heavy cavalry spurs their mounts and charges, beginning the battle on the exact terms Henry V had dictated. The charge, which should have been a thunder of hooves and steel, turns into a nightmare. The knights are immediately channeled by the narrow terrain between the woods, forced to bunch together into a compact mass. Almost instantly, their heavy war horses sink into the deep mud, which robs them of momentum and energy. With every step, what should have been a devastating gallop is reduced to a heavy, agonizing trot. They become large, slow, perfect targets for the English archers, who, protected by their stakes, unleash a storm of arrows from the flanks. Every minute, thousands of bodkin-tipped arrows rain down upon them. The effect is catastrophic. The arrows, unable to penetrate the knight's best armor, find their targets in the horses, which have far less protection. The animals, wounded and crazed with pain and panic, rear up and become uncontrollable. Many, in their terror, turn and gallop in the opposite direction, crashing directly into the next wave of French infantry advancing on foot behind them. The French cavalry vanguard is not only stopped, but turned into a weapon against its own army, sowing chaos, disorder, and death in its own ranks, before even reaching the English line. The first French move has been an absolute disaster. Now it is the turn of the main French force. Thousands of dismounted men-at-arms and knights advancing on foot. Their advance is torture. Every step is a struggle against the sticky mud that threatens to suck off their boots. They are burdened by the weight of their full-plate armor, between 20 and 30 kilos of steel, which turns the walk across the field into an exercise in extreme exhaustion. When they finally reach the English line, after being harried by an incessant rain of arrows for the entire journey, they are not the fresh, overwhelming force they expected to be. They are exhausted men, breathless and on the verge of physical collapse. The bottleneck of the terrain compounds their misery. They are so compressed by the pressure from the ranks behind them that they barely have room to lift their weapons. The image is that of a crowd being crushed against a closed door. The thin line of English men-at-arms, far fewer in number but fresh and well-positioned, holds against the initial impact. a wall of shields and steel, is formed, a brutal and desperate fight. The French, despite their numbers, cannot break the line. They are trapped between the impenetrable English defense in front and the pressure of their own men from behind, while arrows continue to rain down on them from the flanks at point-blank range. The fighting on the front line becomes a bloody stalemate, a meat grinder where the French fall in greater numbers due to their exhaustion and lack of space. Men stumble over the bodies of the fallen, sinking even deeper into the mire. It is then that Henry realizes the decisive moment has come. He sees the elite of France immobilized, exhausted, and in complete disarray. It is the signal to unleash his true killers, the men who will win the battle not with the nobility of steel, but with the brutality of the desperate. The English archers receive the order. Dropping their bows, many of which are now out of arrows, they leap over their protective stakes. They wear little or no armor, which gives them a crucial advantage: agility. Armed with whatever they have at hand, short axes, war hammers, maces, long knives, and even the very swords they have looted from the fallen, they throw themselves upon the flanks of the immobilized mass of French knights. They are like a pack of wolves attacking a herd of oxen trapped in the mud. The battle ceases to be a clash of soldiers and becomes a massacre. The carnage that follows is appalling. The light and swift archers move with ease through the mud that is a death trap for their armored enemies. They do not face the knights head-on. Instead, they surround them, pull them down, taking advantage of their lack of balance, and kill them on the ground. They use their axes and hammers to dent helmets and stun their opponents, then slide their daggers through the slits of visors or the joints of armor at the neck and armpits. It is dirty, personal, and terrifyingly effective work. The nobility of France, helpless, is slaughtered by the peasants they so despised. The collapse of French morale is total. Trapped, exhausted, and being massacred from all flanks, panic seizes them. Those in the rear ranks, seeing the carnage unfolding at the front, try to retreat, colliding with the waves still trying to advance, creating even greater chaos. The second and third waves of the French army disintegrate before even entering combat, blocked by the mass of their own retreating men and the piles of corpses that now cover the field. But the battle is decided. All that remains is the extermination. In a controversial moment, news arrives of an attack on the rear of the English camp. Fearing a French regrouping and without enough men to guard the thousands of prisoners they have already taken, Henry V makes a brutal and pragmatic decision. He orders the execution of most of the noble prisoners, an act that violates all codes of chivalry but ensures that his small force will not be attacked from behind. It is a merciless end to a merciless battle, a display of the ruthless mindset that lay beneath his regal charisma. At the end of the day, the battlefield is a vision of hell. The flower of French nobility lies dead or dying in a sea of mud and blood. The arrogance that had shone so brightly in the morning has been extinguished, drowned in the mire. The small, ragged English army, the happy few, the band of brothers, has achieved the impossible. They have not only survived, but they have inflicted upon France one of the most catastrophic and humiliating defeats in its history. A victory that defied all logic and would be sung and told for centuries to come as the epitome of the underdog's triumph. The statistics of the carnage at Agincourt are a testament to the scale of the French catastrophe. English losses were astonishingly light for a battle of this scale, with estimates ranging from 100 to 400 dead. In stark contrast, French casualties were apocalyptic. An estimated 6,000 to 10,000 men died on the field, with many more taken prisoner. But the numbers do not tell the whole story. The victims were not common soldiers. They were the heart of France's aristocracy and military leadership. 3 dukes, 9 counts, a viscount, and the constable of France himself were among the dead. A decapitation of the country's ruling class in a single bloody afternoon. The fate of the French commanders mirrored the annihilation of their army. Constable Charles d'Albret, the nominal commander, died in the heat of battle, fighting among his men. Many other high-ranking leaders met the same fate, crushed in the chaos of the melee. Marshal Boucicaut, one of the most respected military figures in Europe, was one of the few who survived, only to be captured. He was taken to England as a war trophy and died in captivity 6 years later, never to see his homeland again. For France, it was not just a military defeat. It was the loss of an entire generation of its leadership. The battlefield, At dusk was a scene of indescribable horror. The bodies of the dead and dying were piled in mounds, sometimes 3 men high, especially on the narrow battlefront. Chroniclers of the time described how rivers of blood ran through the mire, mixing with the rain to create a crimson swamp. Many of the French nobles, in their heavy armor, did not die from a sword or arrow wound. They fell into the mud and, too exhausted to get up or crushed by the weight of other bodies, simply drowned in the mere, an ignominious and terrible death for the proudest warriors in Christendom. The field they had chosen for their glory became their anonymous grave. Politically, the Battle of Agincourt was a devastating blow to France. The annihilation of much of its nobility and military leadership plunged the country into a deep state of demoralization and political chaos. The victory gave Henry V immense momentum and prestige, allowing him to continue his campaign in the following years with remarkable success. He managed to conquer much of Normandy, and finally, in 1420, forced the French king, Charles VI, to sign the Treaty of Troyes. This treaty, a total humiliation for France, disinherited the French king's own son and named Henry V and his future children as heirs to the French throne, uniting the 2 crowns and bringing Henry closer to his ultimate goal of ruling both kingdoms. For England, Agincourt instantly became a foundational myth, the ultimate symbol of the nation's resilience, courage, and fighting spirit. It was transformed into the definitive story of the band of brothers who, against all odds, faced an overwhelming enemy and emerged victorious. The battle personified the idea that the determination and skill of common men, the archers, could triumph over the arrogance and power of the aristocracy. This narrative struck a deep chord in the English psyche, becoming a source of national pride and a cultural touchstone that has endured for over 600 years, an eternal reminder of their finest hour. The legend of Agincourt was immortalized and seared into the cultural consciousness of the West, thanks in large part to one man, William Shakespeare. In his play Henry V, Shakespeare dramatized the events surrounding the battle, creating a heroic and charismatic portrait of the king. His St. Crispin's Day speech, delivered by Henry before the battle to inspire his troops, has become one of the most famous pieces of English literature, a rallying cry for all who face insurmountable challenges. Through the power of Shakespeare's theater, Agincourt transcended history to become a universal legend about courage, leadership, and brotherhood in adversity. Militarily, Agincourt marked a turning point in medieval warfare. Although it was not the first time heavy cavalry had been defeated by infantry and projectiles, the scale and decisiveness of the victory conclusively demonstrated that the era of the armored knight as the supreme king of the battlefield was coming to an end. The battle underscored the lethal effectiveness of the English longbow when used en masse and, more importantly, the critical importance of choosing and preparing the terrain. The lesson of Agincourt was clear. Clever strategy and the astute use of the environment could nullify even the most overwhelming of numerical and technological advantages, a principle that remains fundamental in modern warfare. The most enduring and terrifying image of Agincourt is not of an arrow in flight or a sword clashing against a shield, but of the mud. The final, unforgettable detail of the battle is the fate of countless French nobles. They were not cut down in heroic combat, but died in a far more humiliating and primitive way. As they fell on the battlefield, the weight of their own plate armor, designed to protect them, became their death sentence. Trapped under a mountain of bodies of men and horses, or simply too exhausted to fight the suction of the mud, they drowned. The earth itself, the soil of their homeland they had come to defend, consumed them. Thus, the legend of Agincourt was sealed not only in blood, but in mud. The battle became the ultimate metaphor for how arrogance can lead to a fall. The nobility of France, so certain of their superiority that they ignored all warning signs, the terrain, the weather, the desperation of their enemy, were literally swallowed by the earth. Their power, their wealth, and their pride sank into an anonymous bog, while the small, ragged army of Henry V, which had accepted the reality of its environment and used it to its advantage, rose to claim one of the most improbable and resonant victories in all of history.